Have you ever noticed how younger students often forget to include a capital letter or a full stop when they're writing? Teaching our younger students how to spot and fix those smaller mistakes are an important part of getting our younger students really confident at writing. So hi everyone, my name's Gemma and today we're going to be talking about how important it is to teach younger students how to edit sentences. So this video is actually going to be video 1 of a 3-part video series all about teaching your kids how to write sentences. So in today's video, all about sentence correction, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. We're going to be talking about different challenges that your students might face when they're learning to write sentences. We're also going to talk about how you can introduce sentence writing to younger students, how to incorporate activities and things into your classroom, and then some different activity ideas as well as really quick fire warm-up activities as well. One of the main challenges that your students might face when they're learning to edit and to look at their writing and to help, when they're looking to spot mistakes, is that they're actually struggling to spot the mistakes in the first place. So a top tip to kind of get around this is to use really simple vocabulary, really simple sentences, and to use vocabulary that they're familiar with, so that they're not focusing on new words, things that they haven't come across before, and they can just focus on looking for the mistakes, looking for the parts where they need to improve in their sentences. So then they can easily spot if they've missed a capital letter or a full stop or a finger space, or they've maybe misspelled a word. So another thing that you can do to help your children really recognise mistakes is for you to model it on either a whiteboard, or if you're working in a small group, on like little mini whiteboards. So what you could do is write out a sentence which is, give them lots of examples of sentences that are correct, so ones with capital letters, full stops, finger spaces, common words that they should know how to spell, spelled correctly, and then show them a sentence with the mistakes in them and ask them to spot the mistakes. Another challenge that you might face when you're trying to encourage your students to read back over their writing and to spot and correct mistakes is that they're just not interested or they're just not motivated to do it. So quite often, especially when I've been teaching younger students, they're just so happy and so keen that they've managed to write the sentence that they're kind of past caring if it's correct or not. So a good way to do it, to sort of get around this challenge, is to make it into a bit of a game. So obviously you don't need to use sentences that they've written. Again, you can write sentences yourself and then put them on a board, maybe put them around the classroom, and then encourage your students to hunt for the mistakes. You could even go as far as to give them little magnifying glasses, or even make little magnifying glasses to make it into a bit of a game, so then they can go around and spot the mistakes in the sentences. So another way that you can tackle if they're not very motivated or if they're not that interested in looking at correcting sentences is make use of any seasonal times of year or seasonal themes that are going on, or even themes that are going to interest them. So if it's Christmas time, you can maybe make the sentences about Christmas. If it's Halloween, make them Halloween themed. If you're kind of struggling for a theme, try and figure out what it is that your students are interested in. So if they've got an interest in dinosaurs, make the sentences about dinosaurs, or make it about cars or rainforest animals, whatever it is that they are interested in. If you try and make it themed around that, then hopefully that will then increase their motivation in wanting to learn about correct sentence structure as well. So another challenge that your students might face when they're learning about sentence structure and how to write sentences correctly is they might feel a little bit overwhelmed. So when children are writing sentences, there's often quite a lot to think about. They need to think about capital letters, they need to think about finger spaces, full stops, if they're spelling the words correctly, if the sentence makes sense, if they've learned any new vocabulary or new spelling words. So it can be quite overwhelming for them. So a top tip here to get over that challenge is to break it down into little steps. So one day, that's the day you could spend focusing on capital letters and making sure all their sentences have got capital letters. Don't worry too much if they're not spelling the words quite correctly or if they've missed a few finger spaces or full stops. Just focus on capital letters. Then the next day, or even a few lessons later, then you can change the focus to correct punctuation or full stops, and you really emphasise to your kids that you want every single sentence to have a full stop. And again, chances are they will forget the capital letters, but that's okay because you're wanting them to focus on the one thing. And as they practice writing sentences, then you can kind of build it up a little bit and you can kind of say, right, today we're going to be focusing on capital letters and full stops. Again, chances are is they might forget their finger spaces or they might forget how to spell things, but that's totally fine. So the key thing here is to not overwhelm them. So now we're going to talk about how you're going to introduce teaching children how to write sentences to your class. So there's a number of different ways you could do this. So one way is obviously to do it with your entire class. So model it on whatever you're writing on, whether it be on a smart board, whether it be on a big whiteboard, and model how to write a sentence correctly and talk about the different features of a sentence. So again, make it very simple and make it a sentence that they can hopefully decode or mainly read on their own so that they're understanding what it is that they're actually writing. And then really emphasise that your sentence needs to have capital letters, full stops and finger spaces. And really talk about the different features, talk about what the different features look like, and make sure you model it so your children know what you're looking for. So once your children know what a correct sentence, a correctly structured sentence looks like, then you can go on and write a sentence that has mistakes in it. And because you've just shown them what a sentence should look like, hopefully they'll be able to kind of spot the difference, and they'll be able to spot right away if you're missing a capital letter, a full stop, a finger space, any mistakes that you've made. And then what you're going to do is edit the sentence as a whole class and discuss the mistakes you've made, but then discuss how you're going to correct it. So if you're noticing that once you've went over what a sentence should look like and then you're looking at one that has mistakes and you're noticing that your students aren't quite spotting the mistakes that you've made, a good way to kind of take it back a little bit is to still display the sentence which is written out correctly, and then underneath put your sentence that has mistakes in it so they are literally spotting the difference between the two sentences. You might find that your students have actually picked it up pretty well and they don't need to have the old sentence to compare it to, but that's a good little support strategy if you're noticing that your students are finding it a little bit tricky to spot the mistakes. So another way that you can introduce sentence writing and sentence structure to your students is to use sections of sentences cut up on little strips of card. So what you could do is you could have your little cards and then you could write out the different sections of your sentence. So obviously the first word or two with the capital letter, the middle part of your sentence, and then the end of the sentence with the full stop. And then ask your students to rearrange these parts of the sentences into the correct order. Obviously emphasising, right, what do we need to have at the beginning of a sentence, and this is where you would be talking about your capital letter. What do we need to have at the end of the sentence, and then you would talk about your full stop, and then you would obviously say the middle part would go in the middle of the sentence, which doesn't have either of those things. So once your students have begun to get a little bit more comfortable at editing sentences, another way that you could take this a little bit further is to ask your students to work in either pairs or small groups, and for them to give each other really simple sentences to edit. So again, this type of activity can be easily adapted depending on where your children are in their learning. So if they're needing a little bit more support, you could be giving them sentences, again, cut out onto strips, or even a sentence that you've written on a whiteboard, and ask them to work in pairs to correct the sentence. However, if they're grasping the concept pretty well, then you can ask them to write out their own sentence, making sure it's got some mistakes in it, give it to their partner and ask their partner to edit it, and then vice versa. So this type of activity is great for introducing, editing sentences and sentence structure, but it's also really easily adapted depending on where your kids are in their learning. So the next thing that we're going to talk about to do with teaching sentence structure is how you can easily integrate it into your daily or your weekly routine. So one activity that you can do with your class is you could do a daily sentence that they need to correct. So maybe every morning when your kids are coming in, maybe from the cloakroom, or maybe they're getting themselves ready for the day, you can pop up a sentence on display either on your whiteboard or on your smart board, and your kids' job is to basically edit that sentence. And this is something that you can do every single day. So every morning, maybe when they've come in after break or come in after lunch, or even at the end of the day when some kids are maybe getting ready to go home and you've got that last couple of minutes before the bell rings for the end of the day. So you can easily put this on display and get your kids to do this activity at some point every day. And as I said, it's something that's really easy to do, really easy to prepare as well. So I've actually got a set of different sentences in a worksheet pack So you could easily pinch a sentence from there and either display it on your smartboard or even write it up on your board, and it means that you don't have to sit and think about a different sentence every single day. If you're interested in grabbing your own copy of that pack, I'll make sure and leave it linked below. So another way you can incorporate teaching sentence writing into your weekly or daily routine is to set up different, let's just say, centres or stations or carousels, so whatever you call them, where your kids kind of move around and do different activities in different areas of the classroom. So you can easily set up an area where you've got a selection of different sentences that need corrected. Your kids can either do this on a whiteboard, or again, if you use the pack that I mentioned before, I actually slip them inside those dry erase wallets, and your kids can actually use, they can actually carry out the activity using a dry erase pen, and it means that once they've corrected the sentence and maybe you've checked it over, they've got a friend to check it over, they can wipe it out and then move on to another one, and then they can kind of work their way through all the different sentences in this pack. But another way sentence writing can be incorporated into your classroom is to create a display in your classroom. So you can create a display which is almost like a write-in hall of fame, and up there you can display different sentences that your kids have corrected. So this could be examples that they've maybe carried out in written work, maybe you've taken a photo of them doing it on a whiteboard, or maybe you've taken a copy of them completing one of the activities that I've mentioned in my pack before, and you can create a display with their name, and you can really emphasise the mistakes that they've spotted and how they've corrected them. So now we're going to talk about how you can add things to your learning environment, to your classroom, to really help with sentence writing and sentence correction. So one of the things that my kids found really fun was, if you do have a writing area, or an area, you can actually do this lots of different ways. So you could either have a writing area, or if you do have an activity or a centre set up which is looking at sentence writing, or this could even be done at their individual seats or tables, is to have sentence correction tools. So what I mean by this is have special maybe highlighters, coloured pens or coloured pencils, or just something so that when you're looking at correcting sentences, they get to go and pick out these special pens or these special tools or whatever it is they're using, and then that's what they use to highlight any mistakes that they've noticed in sentences. So whether they're looking at their maybe own examples of writing, if you've been doing a writing lesson, or if you're doing a specific sentence correction activity, they can use these tools, and it just makes it a little bit more fun for them. Another way that you can incorporate different areas of sentence writing, sentence structure, and the sort of rules for editing sentences into your classroom is you could display some posters or anchor charts with little prompts to help your students remember what needs to be included in a good sentence. So you can create a poster which obviously maybe shows an example of a sentence, and then you can have the capital letter highlighted, the full stop highlighted, and then the finger spaces highlighted. Another thing that you can do, just to give your kids a bit more ownership of this, the learning in these areas, is actually get your kids to make the posters. So ask your children, how do you think we can remind each other what we need to include in a sentence? And that could, one of the things that you could do together is to make posters, and then obviously they're going to then think about what needs to be in a good sentence, what do I need to include in a sentence, and then they can go ahead and create their own version of a poster which has all the little reminders of capital letters, full stops, and finger spaces. So now we're going to talk about some more activity ideas that you can do to help your children learn about writing sentences correctly. So the first activity could be a bit of a sentence scavenger hunt. So this can be done in lots of different ways. So you can again use the sentences that I've included in the pack that I mentioned before. You could either use them as they are, chop them up, or you can write them out onto cards if you want to have something a bit more durable, and then you're going to hide these sentences around your classroom. And then what your kids are going to do is basically find the sentence, and once they've found the sentence, then they can go ahead and correct it. So another fun activity that you can do when you're looking at sentence writing is a fix the sentence really race. So your kids can maybe be split up into small groups, and what they have to do is they have to race to fix the sentence in like a sort of really race. So another activity that you can look at is actually looking at developing their sentence writing skills further. So once they've fixed the sentence that you've been looking at, again this could be one you've given them, or it could be one from the pack that I've mentioned before, ask your kids to then add to the sentence and make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more engaging. They can make it longer by adding connecting words like because and then they can start, you know, making their sentence longer. They could even go further and start writing a story. Now we're going to talk about some really quick fire activities that you can do with your kids if you've got a spare 5 minutes, you know, in the classroom. So one of the activities that we can be looking at is doing a speed edit. So what you can do is set like a 1 minute or a 30-second, however long timer, and then ask your students to look at a sentence maybe displayed on your smartboard or your whiteboard, and ask them to find and edit as many mistakes as they can in that 1 minute. A different variation you could do is you can maybe display a number of sentences and again put on a timer and ask your students to find and edit mistakes in as many sentences as they can in the time that you've set them. Another little quick fire activity that you can do is, if all your students do have access to the little mini whiteboards maybe at their seats, is you could pop up a sentence with mistakes in it, ask your students to quickly correct it, and then once they've corrected it, they have to hide it. And what I used to do was I would get them to hide it so that they're not showing it to the person next to them, and then I would count down 1, 2, 3, show me, and then get them to show, you know, the sentence that they've just corrected. And then this means that one, they're doing it on their own, so you know like who's understanding what they're doing, maybe who needs a little bit of support. And you can have a quick scan of the room, but the other children in your class are not necessarily seeing what other children are doing. I really hope these activities and ideas have been helpful, and I really hope they'll be useful for when you're looking at teaching sentence writing to your students. And just a little reminder, if you are looking for some activities that will make teaching sentence writing and editing sentences a little bit easier for you, I'll leave the activities that I mentioned before linked below. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in video 2, all about teaching your kids how to write sentences. Bye!